With the advent of patch 2.4 somewhere on the horizon, people are starting to wonder what builds are actually going to be viable with all of the changes that we know thus far. So what I went ahead and did is I built out what I think is going to be the best new class for each one of the different characters that you can play. So just so that you understand the parameters of this, I built them all out as if they were level 90. I took whichever changes to skills I thought were going to be the most impactful, and then I took that character and I tried to make a build that would do at least one or more functions better than it used to do. So whether that's killing Ubers faster, destroying density, being an elite sniper, act boss farming, cow farming, whatever it is. So these are the builds that I think you should absolutely look out for and try out when the patch comes through, in case you're looking for something new walking into the first ladder season. Obviously, there's a lot to cover here. I built each character with their best in slot items. If people are interested, I would love to try doing this again, but with either a starter or more budget-friendly versions of it. So let me know down in the comments if you're interested in something like this. But I really wanted to highlight what the extent of these changes could be, and just how powerful some of these super off-meta builds will be walking into that first ladder. Alright, so without further ado, let's get into it. So starting with the Amazon, what we have here is the Jab Plague Javelin Physical Jabazon. The purpose of this build is to destroy density on lower player count using Plague Javelin and then jab for anything that might be immune to your damage, as well as being able to go toe-to-toe with the Ubers. So that's what we've spec'd into here. We really want to maximize damage output there, as well as have good skill points and utilities so that we can eke out as much DPS as possible. The build is going to max Jab and Fend, as well as Poison Javelin and Plague Javelin for the synergies and damage output, and then we're going to dump the rest of our points into Critical Strike to max out as much physical DPS as possible. Everything else ends up being a 1-point wonder, where you're sitting on 50% chance to dodge from all of your sources, as well as having a decent amount of additional AR from Penetrate, and then having a good amount of Pierce, so that when you are fighting density as opposed to the Ubers, your Plague Javelins have a really good chance of maximizing their cloud spread. The build itself is sitting on Ethereal Titans, Chains of Honor, Crown of Ages with 4015s in it, using High Lords to get as much Deadly Strike as possible, as well as attack speed. A Phoenix Shield. The Phoenix Shield is really good. The 400 ED off weapon, as well as max light and max fire res, is really good when you're trying to fight the Ubers here. Gore Riders, obviously, a Raven Frost, Nosferatus, a rare ring that's going to have either dual leech, damage, strength or dex, AR, all res, anything that you can stick on here. And then Laying of Hands, we did try out a couple different options. Obviously, you would want to have Drax on if you're fighting very specifically Mephisto, but we also have a life tap wand on swap in case you need it. And we also tried out 220 Javelin gloves that were Crushing Blow crafted. The damage change here between Laying of Hands and the Crushing Blow glove, you can check out DPS against Mephisto here. You actually end up losing a little bit of damage when you swap over to the Crushing Blow option. With our full range of charms, including damage, life, hit recovery, and all res, we are at 2700 life. We are at the 52 breakpoint for hit recovery. We are overcapped res on everything, even with Conviction Aura taken into account. And we're sitting on the 75% chance to block. Where the character really shines, I think, again, is going to be in the Ubers fight, as well as being able to clear lower player count density. So we don't have a ton of plus to skills, and we're not sitting on 100% Pierce. But even without that, our Plague Javelin, when you are targeting something like a Hell Cow, is going to be carrying 20,000 damage on the Javelin itself and pumping out 1,200 damage per second. So you toss one of these behind you, you toss a second one, and then you move on, and the pack is typically killed by the time you turn back around to get your loot. For the Mercenary, we are using an Act 1 Mercenary with a Faith Bow. This is to hit the max IAS breakpoint, both on Jab, Fend, and also the shortest throw rate for our Plague Javelin. So the Assassin has a lot of different options, but I think the one that is the most interesting to me is the Physical Martial Arts Assassin. So this one here is another Uber killer that's also going to be an elite sniper, considering you have basically a fake teleport with Dragonflight. But the skill max here is going to be max on Tiger Strike, max on Dragon Claw, and we are going to be dual claw wielding. And then you're going to max Claw Mastery, Fade specifically for the Uber's fight. In every other circumstance, you're actually going to be using Burst of Speed, as well as 1-point wonders down into Venom, Shadow Master, and Blade Shield. The build itself is sitting on a Fury Claw in one hand and a Jade Talon in the offhand. The Jade Talon is really nicer because it brings that 50 all-res mana leech, which is super important, as well as huge hit recovery. The +2 to martial arts and shadow disciplines is also pretty nice, and it doesn't slow you down because you're able to slot in a 15 IS jewel on the base itself. We're again using a Crown of Ages with 40 15s in it, a Fortitude this time, High Lords for deadly strike and attack speed, Gore Riders again, Raven Frost, Nosferatus, another crafted ring here, as well as crafted martial arts gloves. So these are going to be 220 crushing blow gloves. It's also going to bring a lot of good lifesteal and good res onto your kit. Everything down in the charms is like specifically life resistances and hit recovery that you need, and then everything else is 420 max charms. Yes, 420 charms exist. Yes, I've owned them in the real world. They're just incredibly rare. But if you can't find a 420, obviously a 320-20 or a 320 with hit recovery, 320 with fast run walk, whatever you can get your hands on. The Mercenary is an Act 2 Might Mercenary to increase your damage even further, and then is using a Reaper's Toll to apply Decrepify to increase crowd control on monsters as well as decrease their physical damage reduction with a max Tiger Strike, fully buffed, as well as having Decrepify on your Uber. So Uber Mephisto with Decrepify applied. You are doing 23,000 damage per second, and you're killing Mephisto in 16 seconds. Now, you're not always going to have Decrepify up. There's a good chance that your mercenary is going to die. But 16-second kill time on Mephisto on an assassin in this day and age is pretty nutso, considering the only option that you had before was a Kixen. You'll see also that even though we're using max level Fade instead of Burst of Speed, we're actually only 2 frames off from the fastest attack speed possible on Dragonclaw. And on Tiger Strike, we're actually hitting the fastest frame, even without Burst of Speed. So your damage output is not lacking from rocking a max level Fade, but when you are farming anything other than the Ubers, you can use Burst of Speed, be at the max breakpoint, and enjoy that incredible mobility. Being able to have a Shadow Master as an additional tank is a really nice quality of life addition here, as well as having access to Cloak of Shadows if need be. Just an amazing skill. If you're not using it, I recommend using it more. And then what does this build do outside of just fighting the Ubers? So like I said, it is an elite sniper. So with your basically fake teleport of Dragonflight and the incredible mobility of Burst of Speed, you're able to zip around any battlefield, and I consider this build to be able to go in on places like Chaos Sanctuary and Worldstone Keep really well. You have massive physical damage, and when Decrepify procs, just about every physical immune in the game is broken, so there's nowhere that you cannot farm on this build. If you like an incredibly tanky, fast-paced option for the assassin that isn't just a Kixen or a Trapsin, I really recommend trying out something like the Physical Martial Arts, just because of how powerful the total kit is. So this one is probably going to be the most controversial, but please stick it out with me. The Double Throw Barbarian. Now, I know what you're saying. Double throw, bleh. But quite honestly, the damage output on this thing is kind of bananas, and that's without seeing the changes that are coming in the next patch. So the kit itself is maxing out on Double Swing as the synergy, Double Throw as your primary, Throwing Mastery, and Battle Orders. Everything else is a 1-point wonder here, and we drop a couple additional points into natural res, just because we originally built this as a glass cannon. You'll see that we are maxing dexterity here, whereas every other build that we're using is typically only putting in what you need for your gear. The kit itself is using Ethereal Warstrike as well as an Ethereal Lacerator. This one is kind of a necessary evil because you want to be proccing amp damage as much as possible. The rest of the kit is a Fortitude, a Giant Skull for knockback, as well as the 2 sockets and a little bit of Crushing Blow, although that's very heavily reduced on a throwing build. But you're going to put 40 15s into here. High Lords again. War Travelers this time, we want to pack on as much added damage as possible so that our enhanced damage is getting the biggest multiplier that it can. Ravenfrost, Razor Tail for the Pierce, as well as a crafted ring, and then 20 IS Crushing Blow crafted gloves. The reason why you want these is because we need to double up as much as possible on Life Leech and Mana Steal, considering those are also reduced when used through a throwing weapon. The rest of the kit is just what as much max damage as you can stack on this as possible. And I think you're going to be pretty surprised when you actually see the DPS calculator. Why is this going to be a relevant build? Well, Double Throw is going to have chance to pierce on the skill. We don't know how much it is yet, but let's assume anywhere between 20 to 30, right? With a Razor Tail giving you 33 pierce, it means that on your Lacerator, you have somewhere between a 50 to 60% chance to pierce your target. And on War Shrike, which has 50% pierce on it already, you have a 100% chance to pierce, even if it's only 20 on the skill. The damage calculation that we're using right now is a full buff against players 8 difficulty Hell Cows, because something like this build is really looking to destroy density as much as it can, because you want to maximize pierce per weapon thrown. Against players 8 Cow, we are pumping out 59,000 damage per second, and we are killing cows in 0.72 seconds. Players 8 cows in 0.72 seconds. That is, every throw is going to annihilate a row of cows. Why is this so important? The big issue with throwing weapons, especially ethereal throwing weapons, is that you aren't able to repair them to replenish their quantity. And even though both of these options both replenish in under 30 seconds, you are probably going to need to have a second set on swap so that you can finish a single farming session. But if we're pumping out 59,000 damage against players 8 cows and killing them in less than 1 second, that really does mean that on average, one throw is killing an entire pack of cows, obviously in a straight line, but bear with that concept. I think with this much damage on the kit, and the fact that even though I built it as a super glass cannon, you'll see we only have 2,000 life, and that is with charms included. We are still max cap on res in hell difficulty, which I was not expecting to reach. And this kill speed is just bananas. It's absolutely ridiculous. Then if you were to take your damage and actually compare it against somebody like, let's go for Hell Diablo. Hell Diablo, on Players 8 difficulty, you're killing in 9 seconds with 29,000 DPS on your build. 9 seconds on Players 8 Diablo on a throw barb. So keep that in mind. Honestly, looking at the damage output here, as well as rocking an Act 1 Mercenary, again with Faith, Bow, with this much damage, kill speed, and great mobility on a Barbarian, I would not be surprised if Throw Barb is one of the most popular options that people are going to be trying out walking into this patch. Of all of the builds, I think that this one is actually currently the most slept on, and quite frankly is already an A tier build, but with the changes that they're proposing, I think this is going to skyrocket into super S tier, and that is the Pure Fire Druid. Now I know what you're saying, Pure Fire Druid, Keck W, have fun in hell difficulty, but the Druid itself is something that is such a meditation in knowing where to farm. And if you're farming somewhere where either Infinity is breaking the fire immunes or there are no fire immunes to speak of, the Fire Druid absolutely annihilates, and that is with a massive global cooldown currently. With the changes that they are proposing, some change to the global cooldown, as well as bringing more physical damage onto this build, there's kind of nowhere that you won't be able to farm on a build like this, and anywhere that doesn't have fire immunes, you are going to absolutely outshine all of the competition. So the build itself is going to be Heart of the Oak, which is so much more important, especially if they reduce cooldowns. Ravenlore, an Ormus robe, crafted Druid amulet, a Phoenix shield, and now I know this one is kind of bananas. Realistically, the other option would be a J mod or any shield with 4 sockets, because this thing says minus 28 enemy fire res, and that is just so important, as well as the Redemption Aura is nice for keeping your mana up, considering we need to have an infinity on our Mercenary. And then Max Res is also just kind of nice, as well as the Flat Life. War Traps for Magic Find, Stone of Jordan, Arachnid's Mesh, another Stone of Jordan, and then obviously Mage Fist. And then everything down here is a Skiller with Life and Hit Recovery, and then Resistances and Magic Find. The build itself is going to be maxing out Firestorm, Fissure, Volcano, and Armageddon. You're going to put 1 point down into getting a Grizzly Bear, just so you have an additional tank. And then any of your dump points are going straight into Molten Boulder for synergy. Now, the places where I think that you're going to be able to farm really well, again, is anywhere where you don't have high fire resistance. So we're looking at players 8 cows right now for our damage output. Our Firestorm, 25,000 damage per second. Even Molten Boulder is pumping out a good amount of damage per second. Fissure, obviously, your bread and butter, is going to be pumping out 10,000 damage. On cast, the reason why you can't get a damage per second calculation is because Fissure works in a way where you need to hit each individual patch and how many patches that you hit per second, etc., etc. Just know that damage on Fissure is absolutely bananas, especially when you have huge packs of monsters. You're going to have 5,000 damage coming out of a volcano, and this is going to be really important when you're trying to dump physical damage as well onto a target. And then your Armageddon around you is dropping another 6k damage, which alone is killing stuff in 7 seconds. Firestorm is killing stuff in 2 seconds, and then add on Fissure, and basically every single pack is going to pop almost immediate. Now, some of the most important parts to keep in consideration here is that we are prioritizing hitting the second fastest cast rate FCR breakpoint here, and if you check again on the amulet, we're actually using teleport charge. I do think that the damage output from Ormus is something that is going to necessitate something like a teleport amulet, or having teleport on swap. But if you're lazier, you can obviously be running Enigma. Enigma is going to make it a lot easier to wear your gear. Enigma is going to bring you a lot more Magic Find, as well as Run Walk and PDR. And you'd be able to have a different stat here on your amulet. But for people who are willing to sweat a little bit harder and go a little bit more in the paint, putting teleport charges on here is just going to eke out that much more damage on your build. The Mercenary is obviously going to be using an Infinity, Fortitude, as well as Andariel's Visage, and we're using an Act 2 defensive Mercenary so that we have that Holy Freeze aura, making monsters walk through all of your massive AoE damage that much slower, increasing the chances that they get hit. One of the important notes for this build in particular is that we already know that more areas are going to be level 85. So you're going to have more high valuable target areas to farm. And the two that we currently know are Ruined Temple and Arachnid Lair. Arachnid Lair, which is right off of a waypoint. So teleport is going to be a lot less important for some of these really high damage output builds. So try to keep that in mind when you're looking at these things. Where are you going to be able to farm? And what items are you really going to need in reality versus what you can wear to max out DPS on your build? Can I be honest? I hate this build. Sorry. I got to be honest about it. But I think this is definitely what people are going to be trying out. So I built it the way that I think that people are going to build it. And I'm trying to maximize damage for those people who want to try this out. One of the few changes that are legitimately coming to the Necromancer, which is already on a good spot, is that they're looking to better tune Raise Skeletal Mage for its damage output. So what does this mean? Your typical Fishymancer is probably going to try out maxing Skeletal Mage and eking out more damage from this source. So the build in its entirety is going to be max Raise Skeleton, Skeletal Mastery, max Skeletal Mage. We're also going to be putting in enough points into lower res so that with our plus to skill, we're sitting on minus 64%. And then because we're using Skeletal Mage and because we're using lower res instead of amplified damage on this build, we're going to be maxing Fire Golem as well. There are 2 slant buffs to this. One, since we're using lower res, we're going to be increasing the damage of Fire Golem, and there's a greater chance that the monsters will be broken, considering we are also using Infinity on our Mercenary. And 2, Holy Fire Aura, as well as all Paladin auras, are going to see an increase in damage per tick based off of distance to the monster. So the closer you are to your monster, the more damage you're going to do. Put that all together, and what you get is prioritizing Fire Golem finally as an option on the Summon Necromancer over the much more common Clay Golem and Iron Golem. So even though we're using Beast, which is going to speed up your skeleton mages as fast as possible, they are taking 30 frames per attack. That is over a second per attack. But this is the best that we can do right now to maximize their damage output. The rest of your kit is Enigma, so you can Telestomp without reservation, Shaco with Magic Find, Amara's, Homunculus with Eldrune to reach max block, War Traps for Magic Find, 2 Stones of Jordan, Arachnid's Mesh, and a Mage Fist. Now, obviously, you can use Trangs to get +1 to curses, but at the skill level that we're currently at, +1 to curses actually doesn't get you any benefits at all. So you might as well have Mage Fist on, which will increase your skill level on Corpse Explosion, which will increase the radius when you explode a monster's body. We're using a defensive merc, so Holy Freeze Aura. Why would we be doing that? Shouldn't you have Might Aura up? And normally, yes, you should absolutely have Might Aura up. I'm building this as if someone is trying to maximize the potential of Raise Skeleton Mage. And if you're trying to raise the potential of Skeleton Mage, their missiles need to be able to hit stuff. And for their missiles to hit stuff, they need to be CC'd in some way, shape, or form. Now, the good news about doing the build this way is that you still are just a Fishymancer. So your major damage output is still going to be Corpse Explosion. Your lower resistance is going to increase the fire damage of your Corpse Explosion, so you're still going to get pretty good clear speed on that, as well as still having the availability of all of your revives, all of your raised skeletons to have tanks, and your mercenary with an infinity is still going to be pumping out really good damage. So what do I think you do on a build like this? Ironically enough, the core of this build, which is the Fishymancer, does everything good. You kind of can't mess up on this build. If you can Telestomp a mercenary in and get them to kill a single monster, lower res and then Corpse Explosion will blow up just about anything on the screen, at least on players 1 difficulty. And then if you're trying to do stuff like Ubers or kill act bosses, you can obviously go revive a massive army of crushing blow monsters like Urdars or Thorn Hulks, and then you're basically tuned in to be able to kill anything that you want. This is probably the only build that I legitimately believe people are going to try out and eventually throw to the side. Realistically, the inclusion of Raised Skeleton Mage, why is Raised Skeleton Mage so difficult to actually use here? You have to hand tailor the skeletons that you're using. So obviously lightning damage is the easiest to break in the game. Only want to have a maximum of 1 poison skeleton mage, and this is only for fighting bosses because multiple poison skeleton mages will just keep overriding their poison and not do any additional damage. You only really want to have 1 cold mage because this is the lowest non-poison damage that you can get, and having more of them isn't really going to increase your total CC. And then if the difference is between fire or lightning, lightning just does strictly more damage as well as hits less immunities. So you are going to quite literally need to keep spawning skeletal mages until you have 1 poison, 1 cold, and 14 lightning mages, depending on where you're farming. And then you get to go play the game. On top of that, Fire Golem probably isn't going to do damage. There's just no real way to get this thing to do enough damage to actually be worthwhile. It is a good tank because it absorbs fire damage, but in Hell, fire is the second hardest to break immunity in the game. So even though you're absorbing damage, you're probably not doing any damage to any targets. Realistically, even if you want to just buff up Raised Skeletal Mage just for them to do more damage and to have more of them, you're still going to be using a Clay Golem until you can replace an Insight Iron Golem, and you really want to be putting these points over into Corpse Explosion instead of lower resist, because 1 point amplified damage is going to cover the screen, and you just want to be able to max that radius on Corpse Explosion as much as you can. If you end up trying out this build, and I am completely wrong, and obviously we're going to be testing this come PTR time, I will gladly put out a revision to this video or put out a response saying I was wrong. I'm so excited that people finally get to enjoy their Raised Skeletal Mages, and I hope for all of the Skelly Mage fanboys out there that you eventually get your day. But as it stands right now, I just don't think that this really warrants the major change to Fishymancer that it would require. Just to reiterate though, it's still a Fishymancer, it still has Corpse Explosion, it still maxes out FCR on an Enigma, and it still has a powerful mercenary. So you're just going to be able to do whatever you want because the Necromancer is busted. So this is another build that already currently exists and can already do things to a certain degree. But with the changes that they're bringing to the kit, I think it's just going to be so much more viable. And I think people are really, really going to sleep on this. So keep your eyes out for the Fist of Heaven's Holy Bolt Paladin. The build itself is maxing out Holy Bolt, Blessed Hammer, Fist of Heavens, as well as maxing out Holy Shock for the synergy, and then getting up to minus 150 max resistance reduction with Conviction Aura. Everything else is a 1-point wonder. You're going to be able to pick up Vigor, have Salvation Aura, you're going to have Fanaticism for your Mercenary, 1 point into Holy Shield, and putting your dump points into Resist Fire just to bump up your max fire res. The kit itself is going to be a Hand of Blessed Light, which will either have a facet in it if you are maximizing Fist of Heavens, or is going to have an Istrune in it if you're going the Holy Bolt route. Griffins on both builds, Enigma on both builds, a 220 amulet on both builds, but if you wanted to swap out your Enigma for something else, you can obviously put teleport charges onto the amulet, which I'm just highlighting here. Herald of Zakarum, here you're either going to be using an when you're on Fist of Heavens, or an Ist when you are on Holy Bolt, since you can run Salvation Aura for free on Holy Bolt. 4 traps for Magic Find, 2 Stone of Jordans with an Arachnid's Mesh, as well as Mage Fist. Everything down here is your combat skills, as well as life, all res, and Magic Find, and then your torch. Mercenary is going to be using an insight on the Fist of Heavens because you are running max level Conviction. You don't need Infinity on your build, as well as Fortitude and Indariel's Visage. Or if you go over to the Holy Bolt version of this, which I think is kind of spicy, your Mercenary is actually going to be using a Tomb Reaver, and we'll get a little bit more into it, but what you need to know about Tomb Reaver is that it has massive physical damage, has the 3 sockets, and it has additional damage and attack rating against undead, as well as huge Magic Find. Looking at the Fist of Heavens build, like I said, it's basically the exact same thing, except we're running Ist runes everywhere, and then the same charm setup. So this is kind of a twofer, because this build gets to do something that other builds don't do. The biggest change here is that Holy Bolt is going to pierce now. So if you've played PD2 before, you know that Holy Bolt piercing is what really made that build shine, except that in PD2 it deals damage to every target. Here, it's still only dealing damage to undead, but again, with the addition of more level 85 areas that we haven't seen yet, as well as some underfarmed areas already in the game, having an 18,000 damage piercing magic attack that will absolutely obliterate undead makes the Paladin one of the best farmers, obviously in the Mausoleum and Crypt, as well as something that I don't think people realize is in Chaos Sanctuary. 2/3 of all targets in the Chaos Sanctuary are undead. And then everything else that you would need to kill, you can elite snipe with Fist of Heavens. Since you're running max Conviction, nothing in Chaos Sanctuary is going to be immune to your lightning. And all you need to do is pop the last seal. So all you need to do is kill Infector. And then after that, you're going to be able to single target burst down Diablo, as well as having an incredibly strong Mercenary to deal damage against him. There are a lot of places in the game that have the vast majority of their monsters are undead. Ancient Tunnels comes to mind, Talrash's Tomb comes to mind, Stony Tomb comes to mind, and then anything else in those areas can either be dealt with by your Mercenary, as well as just getting popped down with Fist of Heaven. And just to give you the idea, targeting something like the Grand Vizier in the Chaos Sanctuary, we're pumping out 42,000 damage per second and killing them in 0.2 seconds with Holy Bolt, or looking at Fist of Heavens, killing them in 1.4 seconds. And this is on Players 1. Players 8 difficulty, you are killing Grand Vizier in 0.9 seconds with Holy Bolt, and you're killing him in 6 seconds with Fist of Heavens, which is also going to be shooting bolts out at all of his minions and killing all of them in the meantime. And this is on the Holy Bolt version of the build. If we look at Fist of Heavens, maxing out damage, you are killing Grand Vizier Players 8 in 0.6 seconds and 0.1 seconds on the Holy Bolt. Your damage output is kind of nutso on this build, and that's without seeing any of the changes that are coming to the build with the new patch. I honestly think that Fist of Heavens is kind of slept on. It's definitely a bit janky right now, and it's only going to get better. But the kit gets to run one of the most powerful items that says plus to skills in the game across the board, and also able to stack a lot of Magic Find, especially on the Holy Bolt version. If you are somebody who is bored with just running Blessed Hammer, or just running a Zealer or a Smiter, I think Fist of Heavens is really going to be something that is willing to try out. And especially in the earlier game, where something like a hobble costs nothing, nobody cares about this item. And even without something like a Griffin's, you can just run the pure Holy Bolt package and then farm those underrepresented, like mostly undead areas, and just reap the rewards of being able to cruise through there with massive damage on your kit. Saving the best for last, I know this is the one that I'm most excited for. We are finally getting our old school Nova Sorceress back. That's right, pure Nova Sorceress. So what we currently know about the changes to Nova itself is that it's going to be synergizing with Static Field and Thunderstorm, as well as Thunderstorm synergizing with both of them as well. What does this mean to you? If you don't know, a full Nova Sorc is already absolutely a thing. So this is a 200 FCR max damage Nova Sorc. This thing is pumping out 3k damage at the 200 FCR breakpoint. So every 7 frames, as well as having a massive area of effect static field. And this is so important. We'll get into that in just quite a second. But in addition to that, you also get to run an energy shield, which you can pre-buff with memory, and then maximize out on telekinesis, which is going to minimize how much mana damage you actually take. The build is an Ashudas, Griffins, Skin of the Viper Magi, as well as a 220 Amulet, Spirit Monarch, Silk Weaves for mana regen, an FCR ring, 1 Stone of Jordan with an Arachnid's Mesh, and a Mage Fist. This gets you up to the 200 FCR breakpoint, and then full skillers across the bottom, as well as all res and magic finds. With our full buffs and against players 5 cows, which is what I think currently is the sweet spot for kill speed without seeing just how much synergy bonus these skills are going to get, you are dropping cow packs in 1.75 seconds. So that is 3 casts of Nova, and something that you need to keep in mind is that we have a 32-yard radius static. Why is that so important? 1 static will cover your entire screen and reduce all monsters by 25% of their current life. And because we are rocking max minus enemy light res, you are going to get the full effects of static. So you are going to run up static 1 time and then telestomp and Nova in one-shot packs on players 5 density. Your mercenary running Infinity in their normal kit, as well as being a Holy Freeze aura, is going to keep monsters as tightly knit as possible and slow moving, so that full screen static and then one-shotting packs with Nova is absolutely in the cards. And the damage output here is bananas. If you drop this down to players 1 setting, you quite literally one-shot every single pack, and you wouldn't even need to static. The benefit of static is being able to walk into higher density places and be able to farm effectively on a single element build. Considering that we don't even know the changes yet, and our build is already one-shotting players 5 settings, I think that come the synergy bonuses that the build is going to have, this is going to annihilate. And I think it's just going to strictly replace lightning builds as the predominant sorceress build. 360 AoE on Nova, as well as putting everything into hit recovery, and then significantly stronger average damage than lightning, means that this build is tankier, faster, and gets a higher benefit out of max FCR than lightning does. It can actually hit the final breakpoint. So people are asking me, how would you actually transition into this? And I think you would legitimately go from your Blizzard Sorceress at the ladder start into Nova once you have the gear to do so. You can absolutely run this on the 105 breakpoint, and it's still pretty decent. And as well as you have a good amount of damage in bare minimum in Ashudas, and perhaps an Ormus robe as well as your spirit, you could definitely take this into players 1 and farm some lower dangerous area places. And if you can't get into an Infinity, there's nothing stopping you from running a Plague Mercenary, possibly with the Medusa's shield, so that you have a really good chance of proccing lower res if you don't want to run lower res on your swap yourself. But that's going to go ahead and do it for this video. Patch 2.4 is the first balance change that we're going to see in 11 years. Since patch 1.13c. So I hope that you're just as excited about it as we are. Obviously, we are going to be testing out as much as we can in the PTR, but I really hope that you at least give these builds their fair share. I think that they're going to really perform well, and I think that they're absolutely going to smash people's expectations. Which build are you most excited for? Do you think that there's a better build that I could have talked about? And again, are you interested in seeing these on more of a starter or budget option so you can get a better idea of how it would look for a season starter? Let me know in the comments down below. If you made it this far, thank you so much for checking out this video. It means the world to me that anybody even watches my content. So if you wouldn't mind either subscribing if you haven't already or throwing a like down on it, it would absolutely help me out so much just to get this video out to other people who may not have seen the changes or may be looking for some inspiration about builds that they want to bring into the first ladder season. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.